Today on True Patriot Love Under the Pillar Immigration, I am lucky enough to have Nir Rosenberg from CanadianVisas.com. Good morning, Nir.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And hot topic, of course. You know, we had some great shows in the last month. So, the Canada 2025 budget is out. So last time we spoke, we were talking about Bill C-12. And since then, they've actually dropped with us the budget, which is great. And we've been doing shows throughout the week on it, from economy to all kinds of different issues. So immigration, this was one of the ones that went in there, and they created something called the levels plan. So and basically they gave us a bunch of numbers, hard to reconcile. So do you mind, to start the show, what I wanted to kind of do is kind of pick through it with you. Sure. And see if I'm understanding it right, because I'm trying to still figure out a little bit of where they're going, and they're trying to give us projections from 2026 to 2028, and they're trying to balance, as they say, economic growth, family reunification, and humanitarian commitment. So, do you want to kick off with temporary residence for a minute?
Sure. Yeah. So they're looking at reducing the temporary residence in Canada to a little under 5% over the next couple of years. Their intention is essentially to alleviate some of the housing crisis or the housing shortage that we're having or that we're seeing, reducing the reliance on healthcare. And so this problem started back in the 2020 year when they let all of the foreign workers and students come on in. And now they're essentially trying to kind of push back on that and reduce those numbers. As far as the students go, they're expecting to reduce the students by approximately 49 to 50% of what we currently have today. So we used to let in, or we now have about 330 something international students. Now they're looking at bringing those students down to about 155,000 between 2026 and 2028. They're even going to reduce it further during those years. Foreign worker program, they're restricting a lot of employers for hiring foreign workers, and that's obviously going to draw back on the numbers that are coming in. They're reducing the foreign workers. I would say somewhere between 230 to 220,000 over the next couple of years. That's a significant decrease from what we've had in the past. We brought in a lot of foreign workers, and now they're essentially bringing those numbers down to a level that we kind of never seen before.
Okay. So, hey, help me out with the 5% for a minute, because I was trying to figure out. So they're saying they're trying to rebalance to the 5%. So the 5% of the total population being, if we had 40 million, it'd be, you're looking, 2 million people.
Yeah. But again, that foreign, what would I say, non-permanent residents, includes also visitors, right? So anyone that comes into Canada, whether they're international students, foreign workers, or visitors, they're trying to reduce the numbers, because a lot of visitors end up, securing work permits or securing study permits. So they're overall trying to reduce that number. And we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of visa refusals for even individuals coming in for visiting purposes, right?
Right. And is there students, part of that temporary worker allocation includes, take me through. So students, temporary workers, and what's the last one I missed? The
visitors.
The mobility, international mobility program.
So the international mobility program is is part of the foreign worker program.
Okay.
But what they've done is, most people who are coming to Canada on a work permit require something called a labor market impact assessment. That is an application that an employer has to submit. And once ESDC, the Employment Skills and Social Development Canada, reviews that application, they either approve or deny the application for the employer. If they approve the employer, the worker can apply for a work permit and come to Canada. Those are called LMIA-based work permits. They're closed work permits. The worker can only work for those particular employer or that particular employer in that particular position, and it specifies location and wages, etc. Whereas the International Mobility Program, or the IMP, is LMIA exempt. So that could be anything for intercompany transfers, companies that are expanding into Canada or have international operations and are moving key staff or key executives, specialized knowledge into Canada. Then you have also part of that IMP program is also the French skills program. So anyone that is proficient in French, meeting a specific level, has a job offer in Canada, they're exempt from that LMIA requirement. So anything that falls under the IMP program is essentially exempt from having to go through that employer pre-approval per se.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. So really, they're trying to get that number down to about 2 million. So out of 41 million, they're trying to get that number to roughly 2 million people.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
So now students. Well, that's a whole other thing, quite frankly, because we built a whole. And you and I have talked about it on other shows. We built a whole educational industry around foreign students, right? So that's kind of. A lot of that has disappeared now, I think, in the last 6 to 12 months, and that's gone. So, students coming over now, are they mostly the old standard colleges and universities? Is it kind of gone back to what it was, 5-10 years ago before COVID, say?
Well, we're still seeing a lot of students coming in on private schools and studying in smaller. I heard recently, I was talking to a friend and I heard the term diploma. What do they call it? Something diploma. Diploma factories or something like that, where they essentially I don't think that's the right term, but diploma something where they essentially come to Canada just to get this diploma or the certificate that allows them, almost like the ticket into Canada. They'll just do it just for the sake of doing it in order to getting admission into the country, and then from there they kind of transition to something else. Well, I kind of talked to my friend and I said, that might be true for some, but it's not true for everyone. A lot of international students are coming here to study. They genuinely are taking longer degrees, more higher level programs, master's, PhD programs. I mean, we have a lot of clients that most of our clients, are not coming in for a random, 6-month, 1-year diploma. They're coming in for 2-3 year degrees. They're coming in for master's program, PhDs, and a lot of them are coming in from countries where those programs are not available to them. So they choose Canada. But yes, you do have the bad apples, right? And like in anything, where they come in and they choose a program just so that they could come in, and then they don't even go to school. They will look for a job, and then they'll transition into a work permit. And so we're seeing still students coming in for larger, more advanced programs. But yes, you do have, of course, those students that still come in for the private schools, for the smaller colleges, for sure.
Right. Yeah. Sure. No. And it's funny because you've seen, like I said, over this last 6 to 12 months, as you drive around, you're starting to see spaces empty out. So which was formerly a small campus for education that sat on a corner in a small 6-story building is now empty. So you're starting, when I drive around Toronto, Mississauga, I'm starting to see them disappear. So, my assumption was that was all kind of cutting off. Which I think probably for good reasons, and I think that's probably the right direction at this point. When you're seeing people come now, so it's interesting, and I'm going to take two kind of directions on this. We put about $400 million into the budget to go out and basically headhunt smart people to come to Canada. So in this year, coming up in 2027, we have 200 and I think it's $60 million we've allocated to go find people. And it's been all over the news the last couple of days. We've pulled in some big shot professors to U of T in economics, and I can't remember the other industry, but it was a very specific. And I assume they're kind of being recruited under the program that we're talking about. You know, are you, as these people are coming, are they, you know, or are you seeing a push to find kind of U.S. citizens who have specific skill sets to enter into Canada?
I mean, I know that Canada does go out and look for, you know, specialized skills and specialized knowledge. What we're finding is that we're having challenges with employers getting approvals to bring those people in. So what we're seeing is more of a reliance, as you said, on countries that are LMIA exempt, such as the United States. Because if you have, like, we have a program that used to be called, you know, under the NAFTA. Now it's called the CUSMA, so the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement. There is an immigration sector in there, or section in there, and it basically allows for movement of specific occupations, individuals in specific occupations into Canada. And there's a list of 60 occupations. So if you fall into one of those and you have a job offer, you don't need that LMIA. So it makes it easier for you to come into the country on that type of work permit. And so the 60 occupations list hasn't changed since I started doing immigration, and that was close to 18, 19 years ago. But you know, part of that list is professors, geologists in the sciences. You've got mathematics. You've got architects. So it's those types of skills that are under those programs. When we're looking at other countries that have agreements, like Peru, you have certain technical occupations. You have advanced, like, you know, refrigerator repair personnel. So those types of individuals can come into Canada in a much more easier route, per se, from those that are coming in, like a nurse, right? A nurse requires an LMIA. But there's other challenges that we're seeing with skilled workers like nurses, where it relates to credentials. So we are having, you know, we're seeing Canada going out to look for these people, but even if they do find some of these individuals, there's some red tape to bring them in. And now with the ESDC's refusal to process policy, we're having a major issue with employers being able to hire these workers. Even if you found the worker, you may not be able to bring that worker in. You may still have that red tape, whether it's from the ESDC side or the IRCC. You can have an employer who got approved for an LMIA to hire, you know, 10 nurses, and then now they can't bring those nurses in because they're not eligible to work. And so you have some of these instances show a catch-22, right? You have to have Canadian work experience to get licensed. You can't get licensed because you can't get the work experience. So yes, they're looking for those individuals. They're finding those individuals. They exist, right? They're out there. They want to come to Canada, but there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape around that.
Right. Well, that's a good message, you know, because we are putting, you know, the real push, and we actually in the budget spent a lot of time talking about why it's important for us to do that. I don't know if you had a chance, but the budget's driven around investment in all new industries, and you know, it's a country altering budget because our deficits and our actual capital spend in this budget have hit an all-time high in order to try to get some productivity and returns back into the country and invest in the country. So, you know, that red tape hopefully will go away. I know there's a number of announcements today on big capital projects, you know, and I think we seem to be pushing into mining and resources more. So, you know, it wouldn't shock me to see some of those 60 people on your list coming from, you know, geologists and people who have technical skills in mining and trades and that are related. But I hope so, and I hope they're doing a good job, because I don't know if we've been super strong in the last few years on basically training people to be in those industries, given, we've had a lot of red tape just to get people into those industries in Canada, let alone bring people into those industries. So, no, I hope so. Hey, temporary foreign workers. So these are and we're kind of talking about students, and we're talking about, so what jobs are you seeing, like, as people are trying to enter into the country? What jobs specifically are you seeing? So you're seeing, are we still having like restaurant? Are we still having issues with all those things? Or are those all dried up?
Yeah, the hospitality industry, the restaurant service-based industries, they are problematic. The ESDC, which is the department that reviews the employer applications and kind of provides those pre-approvals to employers, will not entertain an application from for example, from a restaurant that is looking to hire workers, or chefs, or because they're refusing to process applications if you're in a region that is 6% or more of unemployment rate. So if you're in majority of Canada, right, is 6% or more, and there's very few exceptions to that. And there are exceptions to certain occupations, like in healthcare, caregivers. But the majority of the employers that are looking to hire are not necessarily able to pay the higher wages, which exempts them from that. And we actually have a funny story. I don't know if I should say it's funny or I mean, it's humorous at this point. We had a restaurant, a very large international Indian restaurant that hires international chefs, and they bring in these specialty chefs to work in their restaurants. Canadians are not available for this. We submitted an LMI application for this company. We got the refusal. And so when we started to investigate why we were getting a refusal, the officer basically came back and said, well, you're offering a higher wage than the rest of your staff in the restaurant. And so the only, and mind you, the only way to go and apply for this LMIA is to increase the wage, to put yourself to pass the threshold to be in the higher wage category. So that's $36 an hour in Ontario.
Right.
The chefs were being paid $27 prior. So in order to allow the submission of this LMIA application to be processed, the company said, we're so desperate, we're willing to pay the $36 an hour, let's submit. So now the ESDC, the government's coming back and saying, well, we don't want to approve this because you told us that you're increasing the wage in order to submit this application. Well, yeah. So, I mean, you're putting us in between a rock and a hard place, right? So now the company is out several chefs, reducing hours of operation, which means that now Canadians who are working at this restaurant are now being potentially laid off or reducing their hours. So you're seeing a lot of this across Canada. We had a major hotel chain that was trying to bring in service workers. They were refused because they're not a lot. Like, ESDC is now focusing on language requirements. So they're saying if your job requires English or French, and they're very difficult with saying with accepting other languages that are part of the job duties. They're forcing English or French primarily. So some applications are being refused because of wages. Some are being refused because of language barriers. And so you're having a lot of these issues between ESDC where they're not approving employers. So
right.
This started 6 to 8 months ago. We had a major reduction in LMIA approvals and LMIA submissions, and it's coming from the top down. This is politics. That's what at least it seems. They're not allowing employers to submit applications, and when they are allowed to submit an application, they're refusing them because they're choosing the method that allows them to submit the application because they're desperate. So we're seeing employers having a very, very, very tough time hiring foreign workers. Even those, by the way, the chefs that we applied for, they were working in Canada. They are working already. So it's to renew and to extend their their status. So what we're seeing is, even though they want to reduce bringing in new foreign workers, they're almost essentially kicking out those that are already here by
Wow.
not giving them an opportunity to renew.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting when you're talking about it. We did the budget review the other day, and in the deficit. So we had this year we're going to have a $78.3 billion deficit in Canada for the federal government, and one of the big line items is the unemployment insurance, and they're now in going up to 2030. They're projecting that unemployment kind of in 27, 28 is going to go to somewhere up to 9 to 10%. So they're actually planning it. They're actually projecting it in the budget. It's showing the substantial increase in the unemployment insurance rates. So, imagine when that happens, how tight that's going to get, because your threshold of 6% will definitely not be attainable anywhere in Canada at that point. And then the issue becomes, and I have a few friends of mine who have coffee shops. The issue then is, quite frankly, where do they get people to do that? So they can't even open full hours now, because they're just at a point where, and they're big brands, quite frankly, but they just can't get people. So they shut down at 7:00.
Right.
And that's a shame, because then that really harms their business. And it goes back, it's interesting conundrum, and I think we're going to have this in a lot of industries in Canada. We're going to make this huge investment. So we have this $46 billion capital investment that we're going to put into major projects, infrastructure, everything else. So where are we going to get the people to actually build these projects? That's the first thing. And the existing population, are they going to be are they going to want to go into those jobs? That's really the challenge we have, because quite frankly, a lot of people who are here right now, who are Canadians, have been to school, they have a profession, or quite frankly, they were educated in some other line of work. They don't want to change. So they don't want to go up to Northern Ontario and be in a mine. They don't want to go to BC and work on LNG factories, right? Or it's just not interest to them. So, that's the big challenge we're having. And I'm sure, in the US, they have the same thing, and Canada for sure. So I think that's the roadblock, and I hope we get better at it. Permanent residence. Let's jump into there for a minute. So very confusing when you go through the numbers. So we talk about 380,000, and then we talk about 33,000. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm reading through it, and I'm there's skilled work here, the PNPs, provincial nominee program. There's the Atlantic immigration. There's all these pathways. And then there's the family class, and then the refugee class. So they break it down, economic immigration. But what is the total number of permanent residents? Like what are they projecting, and where do they want to go with that?
My understanding is that they're going below 550,000 going forward, total. That includes all classes. They are. We're seeing that as well, right? So we're seeing that under the kind of the federal express entry pool, we're seeing a lot less draws, and that's kind of like a lottery system. So you put yourself in a pool and you wait until you get selected. It's a points-based system. They're now coming out with, that's their solution, or part of the solution, it seems, to reduce the foreign workers that are in Canada, if they can't remove them, is to help them transition to become permanent residents. And we're seeing that through an announcement they made just last week or this past few days related to provincial nominee programs, where they want to focus more on provincial nominee programs, which is essentially an alternative to the federal program. But those require foreign workers or international students that already have experience in Canada or have studied in Canada. So what we're hearing is that over the next few years, they want to reduce the numbers from more than 550 to under 550, and that it's showing as well. As far as how quickly people become permanent resident, they canceled the entire caregiver program, which was expected to allow caregivers who are in Canada to transition to become permanent residents. Now they're not even allowing that. So they're either canceling programs or reducing the number of visas that they're actually allocating.
Yeah, I did hear about that. So where's they keep bouncing around this 33,000 number, and is that one of the draw numbers they're talking about? So I'm trying to figure out, because I see here they're talking about total admissions stable at 380. Then they still keep, the interesting one is, and I find this is kind of interesting. They still have a significant 13% for refugees and protected persons, 22% for family class. So that's if you're bringing your spouse, partner, or grandparents or something like that, or children, I guess. But they seem to be, like you said, they're struggling to figure out pathways for people who are here. And that's really kind of head scratching, given, even our last show, when we talked about C12, right? Like,
right.
So we have people here, they've been educated, they've been through the formal, process of coming here. They put money down, quite frankly, leveraged themselves at home, and then they're sitting here, and now we're trying to reduce, I guess, their ability to become a PR. Is that because we want the flexibility in case unemployment goes up? Is that, like, I'm trying to understand the rationale on that. We're sort of slowing that down, saying, okay, you're here, but you might be in the PR process for, I've heard stories where people were in a PR process for 8 years. So
I mean, some of those programs relate to either parent sponsorships that are delayed for years. Those exceed 3, 4, 5 years now. You have the caregiver programs that from the past are still lingering in the queue. We have clients that are waiting 4 or 5 years on permanent residency through those programs as well, when they've originally promised 1 to 2 years. And now they're canceling them altogether. I'm not sure what that 33,000 number is. Perhaps it's one particular category, but I can say that majority of the permanent the majority. So Canada's looking to transition these temporary workers and international students to permanent residents, but they're using a method which it's either the PNP programs or the express entry program. The problem is, what we're seeing is the requirements to meet are difficult. We have some clients that come to us now, and we'll tell them, look, fill out an assessment form. Let's assess you against 110 different immigration options today, right? Which include all the PNPs. And they might qualify for 1 or 2, perhaps PNP programs, which is essentially provincial nomination, and it may require an employer support. A lot of these PNPs are now employer driven, where the employer has to meet a requirement, like revenue or number of employees. Now, if you have a smaller business that doesn't meet those requirements, but is desperate to keep this employee, they can't, right? And we're seeing that in assisted living facilities. We're seeing that in restaurants. We're seeing that in smaller mom and pop shops that rely on the foreign worker to work, especially in areas that are more kind of rural. And then these employers don't meet those requirements, and so we're kind of stuck. So they are reducing the numbers of permanent residencies visas overall. The largest reduction that we're seeing is the express entry program, because in the past we used to have a draw every single week or every other week for 3,000-4,000 individuals, and that could be an individual that has a family with 3 children, or it could be a real true individual that's single. So now they're doing draws one every few months. And it could be for 700 people. It could be for 1,000 people, or it could be just for the French skills program. So you've got a lot of people that came to Canada, relied on these programs, and now because of overnight changes, there's no path. There's no path for them, even if Canada is saying, we're going to spend more effort and we're going to increase more allocation to the provincial nominee programs to select more individuals, they're not reducing I would say the requirements. The requirements are still the same for the most part, right? We haven't seen major reduction. Now, if you're not working in a particular occupation, or if you're not working in a particular location, or if you're not working for an employer that meets those requirements, you can't apply. So we're seeing that become an issue, and I think part of the reason why they're trying to rely on those PNPs now, when they made that announcement, is probably partly because of that C12, because they're seeing a lot of these foreign workers or these international students file refugee claims. So they're saying, let's have a different solution to try and transition them.
Right. No, it's interesting. And can I ask you, this is, I noticed on the read that Quebec, quite frankly, so if you can speak French, I get that system, you basically, you have to figure out, how you score in your point system. And then quite frankly, you go into the lottery, and then the lottery is less frequent. So you have a couple hurdles, right? You have an ever-changing point system that seems to bounce around a little bit, I think, right? From what I'm hearing. It might be stabilizing a little bit. And then once you get to that point system, you just got to be lucky enough to be picked in the lottery. And then, but is there a better place? So then I guess, number one, if I speak French, I have a better, do I have a better chance of being picked? Because it's free. It's interesting, when they did the budget and you look through the documents, they actually carve out Quebec as a to be determined number of permanent residents. So it's like, okay, we're not going to commit to a number here. The rest of Canada, you get X amount. So under your 500,000 or, 380 or whatever it is over the time. But, and the rest of you, but if you can figure out to speak, and what do you have to do? I guess this is the question is, how do you qualify? Do you have to pass a test in French in order for you to, so do you write something like do you go take a small test to figure out your French language skills?
Yeah. So the to be determined number, to be determined, from Quebec. Quebec's always likes to be different, and so Quebec has its own immigration system. They rely on their own requirements, and they've created their own paths. And yes, they rely primarily on French. The programs in Quebec are tougher to meet. You have to work in Quebec. You have to study in Quebec. You have to speak French, and you have to have a certain level. We don't know what those numbers are, as you said, but essentially the Quebec. So there are Quebec programs for immigration if you live and study and work in Quebec. But if you are a French speaker and you've got French proficiency, you do need to take that test. It's called a TEF. I can't pronounce it. Forgive me, I don't speak French. But the TEF and there's two other tests that you could take for French. And if you pass the prevailing minimums, you may qualify under the federal system, under express entry, to be selected for a French category. So they're now focusing, even if you're outside the province of Quebec, they're putting emphasis on French. If you speak, understand, read, write French, you can benefit from additional points in the express entry pool. And so if you have less points than somebody else who doesn't speak French, you still may qualify. You still may get selected because they're focusing on a specific draw just for French speakers. So the score could be 300 and something, 400 something, whereas other scores required are 500 and above today. So yes, if you speak French, take this French test, put yourself in the pool, and you'll have a better chance at getting permanent residency. There's also a foreign worker program under the IMP program category. There is a French speaking section. So if you take that French test and you pass that minimum, you have a job offer. You don't need an LMIA to work in Canada. So it's gives you an LMIA exemption, and you have to actually be working outside the province of Quebec. So there are foreign worker programs now directed towards French speakers, and then there's the permanent residency route as well. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And I've heard, honestly too. So PR for, and interesting because down in Atlantic Canada, when immigration was kind of at its high, Atlantic Canada was seeing a huge number of immigrants heading down, right? So PSW workers, doctors, so that's all kind of, again, got caught in that 6%, I guess, pool now, right? So that's slowed down. So
yeah, absolutely. We're a lot. So remember the 6% rule. There are exemptions to that. There are certain exemptions, like if you're a PSW, or if you're a home support worker, for example. There are exemptions to that, so that your employer can still file an LMIA even if you're in a region that has 6% or more unemployment. But almost every other occupation is restricted. So unless you pay the higher wages, unless you're an employer that's willing to pay the higher wages, you can't apply. But again, like that story I mentioned earlier, where we had an employer that says, yes, we're willing to pay the higher wages, they got refused because they're paying higher wages. So
right.
it's like it's a catch-22 for these employers. But yes, there's employers in Canada, and a lot of them in the hospitality industry. And look, in the forestry sector, in the construction sectors, in the mining sectors, you have companies that can obviously afford a much higher salary. These jobs demand a higher salary. They are in the higher earner category. So you don't have issues there submitting LMI applications because you're in a high wage bracket. But I almost feel like a lot of the employers in Canada, those are the rare ones. Those are the exemptions, right? You have a lot of employers across Canada: pharmacies, doctors' clinics, assisted living facilities, memory care units, just general employers that are looking for caregivers. You've got restaurants, you've got hotels. All of those industries are essentially not able to qualify, not able to apply, because they're not able to pay the higher wages. I mean, we had a client that's a fast food chain that wanted to bring in 15 workers. They got refused. They couldn't even apply. They were under the refusal to process because they were going to pay $16 an hour, and the prevailing wage to qualify to submit an application was like 24, 26. What fast food chain can do that? Probably not many. So that's the problem that they were facing.
Right. Well, that seems to be the prevailing problem across North America, right? You have help wanted signs in basically the service industries, and no one can get jobs in kind of the professional professions. Are you seeing doctors? It's interesting because Quebec. I don't know if you're following this whole thing in Quebec, and I can just fill you in on it, but the premier of Quebec came out and he basically, with the health minister, said, listen, we got to revamp the payment scale. So we're going to actually give you kind of this color coded chart that talks about the number of visitations you need to do a year with with the population of Quebec, the citizens. And then, if you don't meet it, there's going to be a clawback, penalties and such. So it's interesting. And there's been quite a rally, and they've all started, a lot of doctors have started to apply to come to Ontario that doesn't have the same, new payment fee schedule. So are you seeing anything with respect to doctors? Because I know Quebec's got to be thinking, I got to probably do a push on bringing doctors into the country now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a need for doctors. We've had a couple of clients that wanted to bring in doctors. The problem that they're facing is the credentials. So yes, you may have doctors who are already in Canada working, moving from Quebec to Ontario. I personally haven't had the experience of assisting anyone in that situation, but we know that there is movement, right, between Quebec and Ontario today. Some of them are going into Quebec, a lot of them are coming out of Quebec, but there is that red tape and that bureaucracy of credentials, and that's not just with the doctors. That's with almost every profession that requires some sort of certificate of qualification or a trade certificate of some sort. And so, yes, we're seeing the need, but again, there's that barrier to prevent them from coming. You can get an LMIA for a doctor today very, very easily, but that doctor may not be able to work.
Yeah, they're driving Uber, right? So
Right.
they're here driving Uber. It's interesting because in the budget we put, like I mentioned to you, a lot of money into recruiting people. So it's upwards of $400 million to 2030. We spent for next year $3 million on figuring out how to get people who have different credentials in different countries qualified in Canada. So that's how little we actually put in. I was shocked that was in the budget. When I saw it, I was like, that means they're not interested. So, and that's too bad, quite frankly, because, situations like you're seeing in Quebec right now, the people of Quebec could be, decimated with respect to healthcare if he holds his ground and he sticks to the pay schedule. I think there's a couple hundred leaving this week. It's going to be a challenge. Hey, Nir, I wanted to talk just before we wrap up. I wanted to talk a little bit about C12, last time. And, it's moving. So I know the budget is kind of dwarfed it, and last time we spoke, it was fresh. Any thoughts? And we haven't touched on kind of the asylum seekers in the whole equation here. So, this goes hand in hand a little bit because of people transitioning from program to asylum. Anything new on that front that's popping up? Anything that you want to share with the listeners?
Nothing that's new necessarily since the last time we spoke. I know that it's been passed essentially on the second reading in the House, but I think it's going to pass. I personally think it's going to pass. And the bill is going to essentially allow, amongst other things, it's going to allow the government of Canada to essentially close programs or temporarily shut down programs, even if applications are in process. They'll just cancel certain applications. A lot of applications, whether it's the startup visa program, the investor programs, stuff like that, they could shut it down. Anything from, having a visa could be revoked. Having a work permit could be revoked. If the government feels like they just don't want to proceed with a particular program, they can put a pause to it. They could stop it. I don't know, how whether or not they will do certain things like that. But I think that having that right to do that is it's very scary, because people can come here and invest and not just invest money, but invest their time and invest, and pay taxes and everything. And all of a sudden they could be found to not qualify for a program that they expected to target, or that they were targeting. So it's a very, it's a very scary thing to think that the government can just eventually do whatever they want to do with the immigration program, and without having, going through due process. So it's just, it's one of those things that we'll have to see if first of all, if it passes. I think it will. We'll have to see if they'll actually, act on it.
Yeah, no, and this is, my concern on the last show is that, most of these people have switched into asylum because, quite frankly, their avenues were being cut off, and now, when this passes, that's a challenge for a lot of people. Hey, before one other question I had, and it really is to do with something that we're seeing in the U.S. So the U.S. has been pretty, over the years, steadfast in creating investment programs for green cards. So, you put your money into an urban development program, you lock it in for a couple of years, and basically you're allowed to get a green card to stay. Canada like programs? Like, is there anything that people
Canada
should be
Canada was very popular, was the Quebec Investor Program, which essentially mirrors the U.S., what you're referring to as the EB-5 program, the employment-based 5 program, which is, you put money in, it's locked in for a few years, and then you don't have to operate anything. You just invest money into either a project that they're running, or some sort of regional, like you said, urgent regional development program. And then after several years, you get the green card, you get permanent residence. So Quebec had a very similar program. They closed it, right? They closed it. They closed it several years ago, and I don't remember if they reopened it now, but if they did, it's a very, very difficult program to qualify for. It's like the U.S. is, I think, 500,000 or 550,000 all in, whereas and you have to have like $1 million net worth. Quebec used to be an $800,000 investment with $1.6 million net worth. I think they went up with that. So, and I don't. So Canada doesn't like those programs. Canada wants, if you're going to come and invest, Canada wants you to operate. This is not a passive investment sort of scheme. That was the Quebec program. That's why they didn't like it. They had a lot of applications, several year backlogs. And so they kind of said, no more with the Quebec Investor Program. There are individual programs through provinces. So Ontario used to have an entrepreneur program. I think it's going to come back. They stopped it a couple of years ago. I think it's coming back. But you have other programs like in British Columbia. You have programs in Manitoba. You have them in Alberta. But they are very specific to you operating the business. You have to have a certain net worth. You have to have a certain investment amount. And sometimes in BC, you have to actually submit a proposal and you have to wait until the government reviews your proposal and says, yes, we like the idea or we don't like the idea. And if they like the idea, they'll give you a work permit. You'll work for a couple of years, develop the business, and then they'll nominate you once you've shown that you've met your obligations as far as what you said in your business plan that you were going to do, where it's hiring employees, it's investing, it's operating the business. And so Canada has these business programs, and there is a demand for them. But again, you have to meet a lot of different requirements. It's not like in the United States where it's just put some money in, have a net worth, go to a regional program, whether you speak English or you don't speak English. Canada is looking at all the factors. They're looking at your education level. They're looking at your investment amount. They're looking at where that business is going to be located, right? Is it going to be in a rural area, in an urban area? Is it going to be in this region, or is it going to be in that region? Is it going to be agriculture, or is it going to be, service based? So there's many different restrictions. Every province essentially has their own list. So if they do have a business program, it's not an open for all. It's typically there's requirements that you've got to meet, and you've got to follow a particular procedure in order to qualify for it. Moreover, some of these provinces require you to even come to Canada and do an exploratory visit and meet with the provincial officials before you even invest any amount of money. So and they want you to operate the business. It's almost like an owner-operator type of situation. Canada doesn't, unless the Quebec program came back, and I'm probably not in the loop about it because we don't really deal with it anymore. We used to have a few clients in the past for it, but because it took more than 4, 5, 6 years, clients were saying, well, we're going to put $800,000. We're not going to see that money back for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and there's no guarantee. This is a moot discussion. So majority of our clients never ended up going with the Quebec Investor Program. That was a very popular thing, I want to say more than 10 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. It was a very, very popular program. Now it's probably dead in the water, and if they're going to restart it, then the requirements are going to be much, much, much higher. You may have to have a $2 million net worth and $1 million in something investment. So they are looking at provincial programs for business, but there's no passive types of investments.
Right. Yeah, I know. I noticed in the budget they talked a little bit about the real estate foreign buyers. Again, we did that. We shut it off, and quite frankly, then they talked about it. I haven't. The real estate market up here right now is in pretty rough shape, so I think they're trying to figure out a way to reinvigorate it. But we'll see. That's something we got to watch.
Yeah, they did. Sorry, they have a. I wanted to throw this in. They did have something called a startup visa program. They still have it. And that startup visa program is it requires you to have like an incubator and you have to be in more of a technology sector, there's a lot of fraud within that program. A lot of fake, we'll say fake businesses get these approvals, and there's not a lot of visa allocated to those. It's very small number of approvals that are happening, but I think they're trying to get rid of that or cancel it altogether because there's just a lot of. It's not a very good program. It doesn't work very well. From what I've seen, from what I've heard, it's not a successful program, and that's a startup visa program for technology for the most part.
Yeah, that's been a whether it be tax credits or the incubators, that they've always been a challenge, I think, in Canada for as long as I've been back here. But Nir, thank you again. I appreciate it. Nir Rosenberg, CanadianVisas.com. Really appreciate your time. I always learn a lot when we do these. And we're trying to do more on the pillar of immigration. So I look forward to talking to you more over the next few weeks as the budget gets passed. The third reading of the budget is going now. I haven't seen any adjustments. So, but if something pops up quickly, I'll make sure you're back on the show and I'll set something up. So Thank you for podcasting with us. And for our listeners, please, stay tuned for the next show, subscribe, and enjoy your day.